today's video is going to be a pretty simple video, just going to have some non-spoilery gameplay playing in the background while we discuss something that a lot of people are not aware of, and in my opinion, it's kind of a huge deal. Before we get started though, I do want to let all of you that are following my Sunday BG3 lore series know that there's a decent chance that this week's video will be releasing on Friday around noon Eastern time, as opposed to the typical Sunday release. I have a very special guest that will be joining us, and I mean very special, so be on the lookout for that, possibly a few days earlier than normal. All right, let's jump into today's topic of discussion, but I actually have two, and let me bang out the first one quickly here, and that is the races and classes of BG3. The first time and the only time that we really heard Larian say that all classes and subclasses from the player's handbook will be in BG3, and note that I didn't say anything about races, was back in their Reddit AMA in 2019. Now since then, they've not really said much on that, although I do recall Sven at one point saying something along the lines of, "We're trying to include as much as we can," which is of course a very different statement from the Reddit Q&A in 2019, which was more of a definitive statement. With that said, someone on Reddit brought to my attention the Q&A on the Steam page for Baldur's Gate 3. And as someone who follows basically everything BG3, I actually don't really check the Steam page too often because I always thought it was really basic generic info that of course I already know. However, in this particular case, it's not. So right here it says, how is the full version planned to differ from the early access version? Larian's answer to this is, the full release of BG3 will include all of the classes and races, and most of the spells and skills contained in the D&D player's handbook, as well as Act 2 and 3 of the story of Baldur's Gate 3. So that is a definitive statement right there on classes and races, and also the 3 acts of the game. I know there's been some confusion around that as well. Unless Larian hasn't updated this particular question in response in 3 years, that basically confirms the monk class, and also it confirms the half-orc and the dragonborn races. Now, most of us already expected the monk, dragonborn, and half-orc to be in the game, including myself, but Larian hasn't given us a definitive statement, aside from the Steam page answer right here, since basically 2019. And they didn't even talk about races from the player's handbook back then. And with them doing all these live shows, you know, the panel from Hells and interviews for us and being so open about so many things, they still remained somewhat evasive on those particular topics, which made many of us wonder. So as of now, I'm going to start saying that the monk class and the dragonborn and half-orc races are confirmed, even though Larian is not mentioning them pretty much at all on anything but this particular Q&A. Now, as for subclasses, I would guess that we still will probably be getting most of them, but at this point, we really need an updated statement from Larian because a 2019 Reddit AMA isn't as reliable for information anymore. But moving on to the big topic today, and that is companion/origin character classes. As many of you early access players are already aware, the companions, which currently the ones that we have access to in early access, are also origin characters. All have pre-selected classes. Astarion is a rogue, Shadowheart cleric, Gale is a wizard, Will is the warlock, and Lae'zel is a fighter. With Shadowheart, you actually currently cannot even change her subclass. She is a trickster cleric right when you recruit her. We also know that Minsc and Jaheira will be recruitable companions, so not origin characters, but companions nonetheless, and Minsc would likely fit that ranger role with a possible multiclass into barbarian, and Jaheira would fill the druid role with a possible multiclass into fighter. Now, if you're like me, you assumed that these class choices for the companions were probably going to be permanent, except for perhaps their subclass choice, as many of the class choices for these characters just kind of make sense for the lore of each character. Looking over the Larian Studios BG3 Discord Q&A section, however, paints a different picture. Can I change the class of the origin characters when I recruit them? Not at the beginning of early access, but we are planning to provide that option later down the line. So there you have it, folks. Not a 100% definitive statement, as planning is a little different than we are doing or we will do, and this Q&A was posted back in late 2021. But at the very least, I'd say it looks like we will be able to change the origin characters' classes, and that really is a big deal. Many people are trying to plan out their parties around what companions to take in regards to what class roles they will fill. You have some people who don't want to take certain companions because they want to play that companion's class with their custom character, and so on. So being able to change their classes would change quite a lot and would offer much more freedom with who you want to run with. Now, remember, this statement was about origin characters, so Astarion, Lae'zel, Will, Gale, Shadowheart, and possibly more, such as Karlach, and it was not in reference to recruitable companions as a whole. So, like Minsc and Jaheira, you probably wouldn't be able to mess around too much with their classes, as they are kind of cemented into Forgotten Realms lore as certain classes, or maybe I should say certain styles, as the classes have changed over the course of different D&D editions. Now, with all of that said, if this does end up happening, which it seems likely according to the Q&A, do you all think that Larian would have to place some restrictions on class choice for some of these characters? I think this would be a really interesting discussion to have, so please comment down below. For example, Shadowheart being a cleric of Shar really fits her story, right? But I guess it would also make sense that she could be a paladin of Shar, but then at the same time, I'm thinking any character can really be a character that heavily worships one or many of the gods, regardless of class. So it might actually make sense if Shadow was pretty much any class. Lae'zel, for example, being a fighter, does seem to fit her really well, just like the cleric with Shar. But I can actually see Lae'zel really being any class, as she's from a Githyanki creche, where she could have probably trained for a variety of different styles of combat. Characters like Gale and Will, however, I have a bit harder of a time justifying them being different classes than what they are right now. Like, I can't really imagine Gale being a fighter or ranger or like a paladin. Gale wants to be the most powerful wizard in the realms, among other more spoilery things that I won't talk about that really tie him to being a wizard. Even being another magical class with Gale, such as a sorcerer, doesn't really feel like it makes sense if you know his character and have played through his scenes in early access. And then Will, of course, with his mysterious patron, is the textbook definition of a warlock. Astarion, I can actually see fitting some other roles, even though Rogue does really fit the vampire's spawn life, especially with him coming from the city, but I guess I could still see Astarion being a stealthy ranger and a few of the other classes. It feels like some of the origin characters could certainly pull off other classes just fine, while others, I don't really see how it would fit well unless Larian has a ton of stuff that they've not shown us yet with those characters and their designs. It's also important to remember, though, that we're starting with a party of level 1 characters, so even though the companions do have deep backstories, the development of their classes at this particular point in their lives has not really begun from a numerical standpoint. They're all level 1, so that could offer some explanation as to why it's okay for them to develop into different classes from here on out. And that's going to be it for today's video. So basically, Monk confirmed, Dragonborn and half-orc confirmed, even though most of us already believed that they would be in the game. That Q&A basically says that they will be in the game. So it's interesting how Larian is kind of not talking about that, but then at the same time in the Q&A, it tells us that they will be in the game. And also, origin characters, we should be able to change their classes, but to what extent, we'll have to wait and see. Thank you all so much for watching, and be on the lookout for the next lore video, possibly the lore video after that, but I think it's going to be this week. It's going to be a very special guest, and I think you guys are going to greatly enjoy it. And if you haven't started following my Sunday lore series yet, check it out. There's a playlist on the channel, and my goal with this series is to get everybody prepared before the launch of Baldur's Gate 3, so you can have a foundation of Forgotten Realms knowledge, and therefore have a much more enjoyable experience playing through Baldur's Gate 3. I'll catch you on the next one.